Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third edition of Inspire and Innovate, hosted by ISGH. Today is an especially interesting program and is focused on women leaders and women Muslim leaders who have sort of really compelling career paths. And they're going to continue in the same train of thought with Inspire and Innovate, which is to help folks amidst a pandemic and a recession traverse their careers in this sort of uncharted terrain. What we're going to begin with quickly is some introductions, and I'll start just from the top left here and let everyone sort of introduce themselves to the group, and then we'll go from there, beginning with Sarish.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Sarish Khan Soleja. I am an associate attorney at Gray, Reed & McGraw. I work in their corporate restructuring and bankruptcy department. Prior to joining Gray Reed, I served as a term law clerk to retired bankruptcy judge Karen Brown in Houston, in the Southern District of Texas, and recently to bankruptcy judge Morris from the Northern District of Texas up in Fort Worth. As a bankruptcy attorney, I work with debtors, creditors, and official committees of creditors, trustees, and other parties in interest in a bankruptcy case. And we also represent clients in federal bankruptcy-related litigation matters. I went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison for my undergrad degree in political science and economics, and I went to Thurgood Marshall School of Law down in Houston for my law degree.
Okay, thank you, Sarish. And Sabah?
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Sabah Shahid. I am from the Springfield, Massachusetts area. I am the Chief Smiling Officer of the Art Cart, which is an international creativity and movement program for those living with a movement disorder, specifically Parkinson's disease. What we've been able to do is we've developed a curriculum to help patients learn to live better with their symptoms today by using art and exercise as a modality. I'm also a published author, and also am the president and CEO of ACS Regulatory Consulting, which is an agency which works with various different medical device companies throughout the US, helping medical device companies register their products through the FDA and other ministries of health internationally.
Great, thank you, Sabah. And Yasmin?
Assalamualaikum. I'm Yasmin Amr, and I'm a journalist. I've been a journalist for 10 years. But this year is an interruption because I'm doing a one-year fellowship at Harvard called the Nieman Fellowship, and it is for journalists. So my actual full-time job is I'm a reporter and producer at WBUR. That's the local NPR station in Boston. So I'm a radio reporter. So I worked as a field producer. Most recently, I worked in the podcast department. And before that, I was at CNN, where I just did producing and news editing and a bunch of other stuff. That's where I got my start. So that's my trajectory.
Thank you, Yasmin. And Sobia?
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. My name is Sylvia. I am currently a gastroenterology fellow at Mayo Clinic in Arizona, which in layman terms essentially means specializing in all things related to the GI tract. My ultimate goal is actually to specialize in liver transplantation and healthcare delivery models, for which I'm actually heading back to Cleveland in about 6 months. I'm also a clinician scientist and do a lot of research within the area of advanced technologies within advanced GI procedures, leveraging AI technologies to help for large data gathering within medicine. And then a lot of my new research focus has been liver transplantation policies. I originally did medical school in Pakistan, and I've been here for most of my postgraduate training since 2012. That's all.
Thank you, Sophia. And Arthur?
Hi, everyone. I attended MIT for computer science, and I'm currently a student researcher at the NASA Mission to Psyche, and I was homeschooled my entire life, so MIT was actually the first school I ever attended.
Thank you, Arthur. And Ezra?
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Azra Belleen, and I am currently on the board of directors for the Greater Elgin Family Healthcare Center, which is an FQHC based in Chicago. I'm the chair for the Quality and Operations Committee. I'm also the senior director for Vizient for pharmacy sourcing and program services, where I manage all of the procurement and supply chain for branded pharmaceuticals, vaccines, technology, network aggregation groups, and services. I've been born and raised in Chicago, attended the University of Illinois in Chicago, Midwestern University for pharmacy school, and Lake Forest for my MBA.
Thank you, Ezra. And last but certainly not least, Mira.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Amira Mona. I am a co-founder of the Minji's Group, which is a consulting firm based in Arlington, Virginia. Our primary focus is consulting on Medicaid populations. We do a lot of business development work. We do a lot of policy analysis. I also oversee our data practice there, where I do a lot of analyses around Medicaid prescription drug trends and how that's impacting populations and throughout the country. I went to Georgia Tech for my undergrad, and I went to George Washington University for my master's of public health and health policy.
Wonderful. You know, as I think about all of the introductions we just ran through, the diversity on this panel is certainly intense. And before we sort of kick this off, I want to reel everybody in on how this program got started and what we're sort of mandated to sort of achieve through these webinars. So, you know, I did mention my name is Uzair Rashid. I lead an innovation function at a large insurance company. And prior to that, I was heading strategy and innovation at CVS Health. All that's to say, early this year, late February, early March, we were really analyzing this pandemic in sort of strenuous detail on the downstream effects of it. And what we noticed is joblessness, being furloughed, loss of pay, anxiety, stress, all led to increased behavioral health disorders. It led to increased uncertainty in folks in traversing sort of these, as I mentioned earlier, like this uncharted terrain of what's coming next, right? And I started thinking, and through a lot of thought partnership with ISGH and the community, how do we create sort of bi-directional communication where we engage one another and sort of funnel in all of this sort of tribal knowledge that we have and share. And so, again, you know, a cold email went out to ISGH, to which the president responded and said, let's do this. And so now we're on episode 3. And to really kick it off, you know, what I was thinking through is like, you know, this panel is made of women, obviously, and women paving their way in sort of male-dominated fields. And what I'd like to do is sort of open up the floor to anyone that would want to comment on, hey, you know, how did you sort of think through, tackle, and sort of execute against building a career in male-dominated fields? I'll poke at Azra, because Azra, you know, I know in healthcare is certainly male-dominated on the corporate side, and I'd love your perspective.
Sure. So I will say that first and foremost, I never thought that I was going to be in the corporate world. I think that when I was in college and going through pharmacy school, I assumed that I would pursue a career in one of the more traditional channels, whether that was hospital or retail or maybe home infusion. And I didn't know that I guess Allah had different plans for me. And so what happened is I found myself being a pharmacy manager at a retail setting shortly after graduating, like 2 weeks after graduating. And I had a lot of work experience prior to that. I worked throughout pharmacy school, which I think is what helped a lot. Because when you work and when you're still a student and you're working, you're already gaining a lot of life skills that will help really propel your career trajectory. If you come in without a lot of work experience right out of college, it becomes a little bit more difficult, and you have to play a little bit of catch up to some of the more social skills that are required in a corporate environment. And after working there, I knew that I was going to get bored. And finding myself in the corporate environment shortly thereafter, in a very male-dominated environment and in a corporate culture that the culture itself of the organization was very male-dominated. I was the youngest person in that area by at least 20 years. I was the only female for probably a good 5 years with every meeting that I went into. And I will say that it's not easy when you first start if you're not mentally prepared for it ahead of time. For the women who are out there who are watching this, I would say that it's not about thinking about all of the difficulties. It's about really challenging yourself to say, are you comfortable with being in that environment? Are you comfortable with advocating for the skills that you bring to your job? So I found very quickly, though, that once I was in that environment, for those individuals who genuinely care about the job, the company, the results, the bottom line, the financial performance, the outcomes, after about 30 to 60 days, if you are really performing at your job, they really don't care if you're a woman. They really don't. And for a lot of, at least my experience, it was really about what did they think I could bring to the table. And initially being a female, they of course undervalued my skills and what they thought I could bring until they actually saw what I could bring. And then they realized, like, yeah, we don't really care. So that's a little bit about how I entered into the corporate world and what it felt like, for a woman coming in there, is particularly in a company that did not have a lot of women in higher level positions.
That's really interesting, and Hadra, I feel like you're in a similar career path, being very STEM focused. You're a computer and software engineer. How are you thinking about it, especially being like in NASA now? What's your perspective?
I think I'm, a few steps behind Ezra for sure. I'm at that stage where I still feel like I have to prove myself a lot within my team. And so I think initially I wasn't very mentally prepared for it because I was homeschooled my entire life. So there was no thing as, oh, girls don't belong in STEM. Like it was mostly, both of my parents are professors and they just wanted me to pursue whatever I wanted to do, and they definitely put a heavy emphasis on STEM and sciences and math. And so I grew up thinking, STEM is all about girls. All girls do STEM, And going into the real world, it was very different. I was told that the STEM world is male dominant and very competitive for women and all of that, and it is true. And you get into those teams that are all male. Like I have never been, throughout my entire undergrad, I have never been on a team that had more than 2 women on it. Like it would be a team of 5 men, and the majority are always men. And most of my teams were all men, and I would be the only girl on that team. And it was always a struggle to get my ideas heard. And even if I come to the table with a good idea, it's always that some guy tries to rephrase it as his own. And it was so frustrating. That kept happening over and over again. And I saw it in my own NASA team as well. Like that happened as well. Luckily, I have a very feminist project manager who is a male, but who made sure that my voice or my ideas are heard, and that people, like the team, realize that, oh, this person has potential, this person is your peer. And I think for me that made the difference. Having a male ally really made the difference in a male dominant world or a male dominant field. And I think that's important. It's the role of men within male dominant fields is as important as the role of women. So if we don't have allies within our team, then they make sure that our peers treat our ideas as equal and all of that.
It's really interesting. Like, so from Azra and Hadra, what I really picked up on is your work ethic is what's going to define you, and it'll build your brand, like showing up and executing. And then what I also heard is find an advocate. and finds a supporter at the same time. And I think that advice certainly transcends the boundaries of gender, but it's especially sort of important with this cohort as well. Namira, it looks like you're about to chime in.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in. I think, as Raj mentioned, it's important, but I think there's also like an underlying part of this too is, a lot of times when you are, I was younger, female coming into the industry, I think there are kind of expectations or maybe, people were projecting things onto me. And I think one thing that I learned personally is, you come to the table, what value you're bringing, why you're sitting at that table, and making sure that you're staying true to that, throughout the process and not letting these things get into your head. So making sure, you're developing confidence in what you're bringing to the table and the reason why you're at the table.
Mm-hmm. Can I just jump in very quickly?
Yeah, of course.
I love everybody's answer, and I think just like on an individual level, everybody has kind of coped with like just really illustrious careers, have had really illustrious careers despite being in a male-dominated field. I would add, if it's possible, and I know it's not possible for everybody, it's just throughout my career, I've noticed that like some people take on like bigger movements. Like for me, I just joined a union. So like, how does a union help women in the workplace? It makes wages more transparent. So there's like on an individual level, you can absolutely excel, and I have no doubt. But then there are these like more hidden things that you find out the more you work. It's like, oh, this guy's being definitely paid more than I am. And just like little things like some of my friends have been harassed, and you don't find out about it until later. So I think my point is find ways to build a good work culture for both men and women. So I know not everybody is in a state that advocates unions, but I would say unions are part of it. I also had a male colleague to fight for paternity leave, which paternity leave helps women a lot because it makes your industry, your company grow around men as well as women when they need to take leave. And so there's any sort of like salary transparency, any sort of training when it comes to sexism in the workplace. So there's things that you can do, I think, on a macro scale that are very important. And if you find those opportunities, I'd highly recommend it because it helps all your sisters out too.
One thing that I would like to add as well is I think this is very important for the young women out there watching today is, we are living in 2021, right? So it's very important for us to have a positive outlook on the workplace and not subscribe to this, mentality that, hey, we're entering a male-dominated field. Who's to say that we're not capable and we're not, I think Amira said it, welcomed at that table. You have the skills, you have the attributes that you need. So go in there with confidence, right? We always hear this phrase, confidence is key. So I think it's important for all the young women out there to recognize all those attributes, all those things that make you special, that make you stand out, and that make your place at that table. And remember that when you walk into that room and know that you're there because you've earned your spot there. So I think the more we try to get away from the stigma, the better that we all will be.
Yeah, that's great advice. And so part of this seems to be paving a path. And in tune with paving a path is progression. And when we think about progressing your career, that all of you sort of have a really unique story to tell. And Ezra, yours comes to mind, having been a pharmacist, as you mentioned earlier, and then going from a pharmacist to an executive role at Walgreens, and then now being in an executive position in healthcare on the consulting side. So can you sort of speak to how you looked at that progression? Was it planned up front? Was there fluidity to it? And what kind of advice can you give folks that are, wanting to get to the point in their careers that you're at today?
Thanks. So first and foremost, yes, I started out by saying I did not have this plan for myself when I started out in college, right? And I will tell you that for sure, Allah is the best of planners. I could never have foreseen where I'm at today, career-wise, and the type of work that I'm doing. And I say this in general because for those of you who are out there who maybe you have an ambition or you think your career is going to go in one direction and life takes you somewhere else. My journey and my story is an example of how sometimes the twists and turns of what happens in your career are actually, in the end, things that are more beneficial to you than you may realize at the time. I originally actually started college with an electrical engineering major, and I happened to be working for Walgreens at the time as a pharmacy technician, and I ended up liking it better. I don't know why. Up until that point, I had actually never seriously considered a career in healthcare whatsoever, and had planned my junior high and high school career entirely around pursuing a career in engineering. And but once I started in the field, and when I started it was just something that I was like, oh, I kind of like this. I wasn't in love with it, but I really just kind of liked certain things. And as I started to do certain functions more and more in the career, I recognized some of the things that I actually really liked. So first tip that I give people when they hear my story is I'm like, pay attention to some of those little inner voices that you have when you're younger and even when you're older. There are certain things that you naturally gravitate towards, whether it's picking up the business section of a newspaper, whether it's checking out something on the art, museum. You have natural passions and interests, and sometimes those are actually leading you into a particular career path that you hadn't thought of. So for myself, I started out as a regular staff pharmacist, and then later right away actually as a pharmacy manager, but I knew I wanted to do something more. And so I had applied for a couple of positions at the corporate office and ended up being selected for a position in purchasing and supply chain. Now, second point that I point out to women is when I got that job, I had no idea what the job was. I'll be fully honest. I had no idea what the job was. Didn't know what it was. And I remember even thinking, why did they select me? Right. I think at some point, everyone, male or female, might go through a little bit of that questioning, like, wow, I can't believe they picked me. And when I got there, I pretty much just learned everything that I possibly could while I was on the job. And from there, I started to recognize that some of those little interests that I had, things that I would do in my free time, all of a sudden started to naturally fall in place and fit really well to the functions of the job that I was doing. And, when I started out, I don't know how this happened. I got a job that, everyone had coveted that only was available because the person who occupied it for 17 years was retiring. This was only one of two positions in the entire company with that particular job title and function. And somehow I ended up in it. And so part of it was, in my opinion, fate and, Allah's hand guiding me in that particular role. But from that point forward, I continued my journey within Walgreens. The next 8 to 9 years at the corporate office, getting promoted 5 times in a male-dominated environment, one that was not very Muslim-friendly either, only boasted 2 minorities in the entire building at the time, was not very easy, but it really was about what did you bring to the table. And so when I left Walgreens, I actually went to go work as a healthcare strategy consultant for a global firm in New York. Most of my clients were in private equity and institutional investment firms. And again, never when I was in pharmacy school did I think I was going to be doing that. But the skills that I acquired from my job that had nothing to do with finance, but I learned a lot of it while I was there, ended up catapulting me into this job that I never thought I would consider or take. And again, learned a tremendous amount of the industry. So what I tell people is when you have to move to another industry, move to another job, move to another country, move to another state, take a job that in an industry that's not necessarily what you had started out with, don't look at it as a negative. You're going to find that you're going to learn certain skill sets and have background information that's going to catapult your career. And the pieces of the puzzle will eventually fall into place. So from that point forward, after I left that job, I'm currently with Vizient, and Vizient supports 60% of the country's hospitals and 95% of all the academic medical centers. And I head up their drug division. So again, never thought I'd see myself here. I don't want people to think that it was necessarily all luck per se. What I will say is one of the things that contributed greatly to my journey from going from an individual contributor on the front lines to where I'm at today is really that, going back to what one of the other ladies had said earlier, was that positive thinking, that anything that happened, I didn't look at it as a negative, looking at whatever situation that you're in as a positive. And I had 3 rules for myself. The first one was that no matter what job I was given, I was going to do it at 100% of my best ability, whether that was taking out the trash, facing shelves, processing data. It did not matter what it was, but I was going to do it at 100%, whether I liked it or not. Number 2, for as long as you hold that job, whether it's 6 months, a year, 6 years, learn everything that you ever possibly could about that job, whether or not it's related to a project that you're doing or not. It doesn't matter if your boss tells you, oh, you don't need to know that. If it's related to the job, if it's related to your company, take the time to learn it. And third and foremost is that when you get called, whether it's for a job that you never wanted, job that you never thought, or whether someone suggested to you, always say yes. At the very least, always take that conversation. So those are the 3 rules that I would say that led me through my journey.
Oh, I love that. Follow your passion, give it 100%, and then, show up when opportunity presents. It's such great advice. And, Mira, sort of your story resonates here as well. And similarly, I'd love your feedback on progression, because you started at Georgia Tech, you were worked health plans, and then you co-founded a leading Medicaid consulting practice. I'd love to sort of poke at you as well and learn how your career progressed in the way that it has.
Yeah, sure. Ezra, I think a lot of what you said resonated with me as well. When I started at Georgia Tech, I was pre-med. I started taking college classes when I was in high school. I was on a track, I knew what I wanted to do. And my senior year comes around and it's time to apply to med school. And I had started doing research on bio-nanotechnology, policy analysis work, and just suddenly realized I really liked policy research. And so, I put a pause on the medical school situation, I think to the shock of my family and everyone around me, and decided I wanted to explore that a little bit more. So, I did that. I ended up, thinking about this a little bit more. And, I really was passionate about healthcare, but actually on a global level. Like, my background was in international affairs, and I kind of wanted to fuse those 2 together. So I started doing internships around that. Lo and behold, at the same time, the Affordable Care Act was being passed. So somehow the internship I was doing got pivoted into domestic health care. Over time, I decided that I wanted to apply for a master's in public health. Got in. After that, got an internship at the governor's office in Georgia. Suddenly I'm doing more domestic health care. And while I was there, I started working on prescription drug policy, found out I really enjoyed that. And so on as, the path went forward. Did another internship at a trade association in DC, which was completely different than the work that I was doing in the governor's office. And then a fellowship at one of the White House offices. After that, I joined a consulting firm, and a year after joining the consulting firm, 3 of the people I was with decided together that we were going to start the Mentorship group. So that's what I'm doing right now and everything. When I look back on everything, I think, to that point, so everything I did and every decision I made at the time felt like I was just kind of exploring what was, interesting to me and what was coming my way. And I remember very specifically a long time ago, I was like, I will never do consulting and I will never do domestic healthcare. But Allah is the best of planners, and things happen, and, they happen in a way. And so, as the path, developed forward, I found a passion in this, founded the company, and every day I love what I do. I love, the contributions that we're making. I think, though, when I look back at that path, I think there are 2 things that were very important for me. And I tell people, I think you kind of have to find what is important to you in your career, because so much of your life is your career. And one for me was to be able to contribute and make a meaningful impact through my job. And the other one was to make sure I was challenging myself through that. And so, and I feel like I have that. So those are 2 things that are really important to me. I would also just say, in addition, the other thing that I've learned, and, exactly as just try everything when you have the time to do it. I mean, you just never know where your interests are going to lie. And beyond where your interests lie, I also found in my career path what different entities were interested in were just random pieces of my past, right? Like one piece of legislation I might have worked on in one place was picked up by someone else, and that's why they hired me there. So I think just as you're kind of learning that path and understanding, the opportunities that are coming to you, you learn about yourself, but it also puts you in a position that you have kind of more opportunities in front of you as well.
Yeah, I love that. There's no throwaway work. Every experience you have, even if it's a failure, is an opportunity to learn, right? I think it's the nomenclature goes fail fast, learn cheap type of thing, and you take it with you as well. And so, progression is certainly really, really important. But what I'm hearing from both Azra and Amira here is sort of figuring out concretely what you're passionate about and impact you want to make, whether you sort of fell into it or really sought it out. And so I want to open this up to the panel and really, poke at the question on how can one figure out what they want to do vocationally? And maybe you can answer that through how you define your career.
Can anybody just jump into this question? So for me, I would say, oh my God, if I were to take a poll for everybody who was pre-med or started out pre-med and had to be pre-med, it was a long battle for me not to be pre-med. I just to be perfectly honest, I enjoyed a lot of things about medicine. I thought medicine was very interesting. I just didn't like being at a hospital. I mean, that's a big part of being in medicine. So I figured that out very early on. I think as much as you can, I'm just like thinking back to freshman me and just like how much I didn't know and how much like exists now that I still don't know. I would say try to put yourself in those environments and see what people do as much as possible, and hang out with the people in that field, because every field, I would say, and I'm generalizing here and I don't mean to generalize, it like has a personality. I don't know if you've kind of noticed that, but it just like, I don't know, there's a certain air to it. People like to talk about certain things. So it's like, do you feel comfortable like engaging in conversation? Are you comfortable building a culture here? Are you comfortable in the culture here? And it's kind of dangerous actually to say that, because so take that with a grain of salt, because some of again, like talking about male dominated industries, some cultures are toxic. And if this is what you love, then you should absolutely pursue it and try to better the culture. Don't let the culture drive you away is what I'm saying. But like just setting your day-to-day, look at what they do day-to-day, and just like, honestly, like you said, it's like Allah is the best of planners, and sometimes your gut just really knows it. And I'm very careful also about the word passion, because there are a lot of things that you are going to like. I wholly don't believe in this, like there's one thing you are meant to do. Very few of us are lucky to have like the one thing that we're just like absolutely born in this world to do. I think so many of us are extremely versatile. Yes, we're better at some things and some things not. But like if you like something, go ahead and explore it, and don't worry if this is like the one thing that you are absolutely meant to do. I would not, like, it took me a long time not to be stressed out about that whole passion question. And it'll save you a lot of time and angst, I think, if you don't stress about it from the beginning.
I think one thing that I'd like to add here as well is it's very important early on, when both young men and young women are in their college careers, is to not have tunnel vision. So I can resonate with some of the other women on this panel who were on that pre-med track. I was on that pre-med track. I graduated with a bachelor's in biology. And then I figured, hey, all right, let me enter in the corporate world. I'll start working for a little bit and let me get my master's, right? So I gave myself a little bit of that time to work a little bit while continuing to build that resume. So, I really stood out to med schools. while I was working in the corporate environment, this is where I got introduced to regulatory affairs. Another thing, this was an internship, that I saw. I was like, hey, I have no idea what this is, but let me try it and let's see what happens. And, really ended up liking it. Had no idea what I was stepping into. But again, it was that, not having that tunnel vision and just trying to see what happens with it. So while I was doing that, I really missed patient interaction, right? I was applying to medical schools, really missed patient interaction. All my life, I was always an artist. So I was like, hey, why not try to combine my two passions of art and medicine and see what I can do with that? And that's where, the art cart was created. And I was able to create this curriculum to start helping patients to get what I wanted, right? And what I wanted, even though I thought it was, hey, I want to be a doctor to help patients, but it was to be helping people, right? To be able to spread smiles, right? As we all know, smiling is a sunnah. And from very early on, I knew that that's what I wanted to do. But I had that tunnel vision, and I thought that, hey, the only way I can do this is if I become a doctor, right? And so when I started the art cart, I was getting so much patient interaction, right? It was like multiple patients every day. I'm working with them, and they're seeing results, right? There's patients with Parkinson's where their hand tremors, they're afraid to use that hand, they're embarrassed to use that hand. And now I was able to teach them how to reuse that hand, regain fine motor control, just through a simple act of finger painting, right? And so I noticed, wow, this is something that I'm really great at. I'm accomplishing my goal of wanting to spread smiles and getting that patient interaction. I had that medical school acceptance letter in my hand, but decided to go this other path, right? So it's always so important to keep an open mind and to not have that tunnel vision. I think if I realized at an earlier time in my college career that, hey, there's many other avenues that I can get to obtain my goal, I think I would have, I think Yasmin said it, would have avoided a lot of that stress.
Yes, it's very eloquently put, and avoiding tunnel vision is certainly important. And a big part of this, I think, is also being fearless, right? I started in a technology consulting background and somehow found myself in healthcare, only because I had this very healthy envy for providers. And both of the pre-med folks that, found a different career path, Yasmin and Saba, I sort of want to advocate for the provider on the panel as well, which is Sobia, who went to medical school. And, I think your career progression is incredibly interesting. Like, you were born in the UK, you went to med school in Pakistan at Aga Khan Medical College, and then you found yourself in the most leading health system in America at the Cleveland Clinic doing a residency. Let me brag on you a little bit further. You're published 20 times so far, and in areas within industry around artificial intelligence and GI and oncology. And now you're at the Mayo Clinic. And so walk us through that, right? Like, there was a moment where you were concrete and I want to be a physician. And then there was further solidifying that passion and that vision by doubling down and going into a fellowship in a very competitive GI track. So walk us through that a bit.
Thank you for that. I will say this. I mean, I can obviously resonate with what Yasmin and Saba said about, the whole pressure to go into pre-med. But I'll be honest, my dad's a physician himself, and he's in a very competitive specialty as well. However, I absolutely had no pressure whatsoever from my family to go into medicine. In fact, I think it really took them by surprise that that's what I wanted to do. I will say this. I think like Azra said, God's the best of planners. We never saw ourselves moving back to Pakistan, especially when I was in my teens. And I think that was by far the best thing that happened for me, because that's really where I found that I found my, and again, this may sound too big, but essentially my goal in life. Because had I not done medical school in Pakistan or gone to high school there, I never really would have seen the state of healthcare. All of you folks have been fortunate enough to be born and raised in the US. I actually got to see what healthcare was like in a developing country. And essentially, and again, some of you may know about this center already, but we have a institution called SIUT in Karachi, which essentially is a kidney transplantation center, which is purely run on donations in all shapes and form. And I think that's really what struck a chord with me. And, you know, having, through my father, already rotated in hospitals or in indigenous areas, in small healthcare clinics, I'd already seen that there was a big need for liver transplantation in Pakistan. And I think that's really where everything sort of came together for me, that one day I wanted to bring this back home. And that's, once I had that goal defined, it became really easy to plan out what I needed to do to get that, to accomplish that goal. And everything that I've done since then has been fairly, you know, focused around that. So, yeah. But essentially, I think and to answer your question about, you know, how did I land at Cleveland Clinic? One thing that I will say, though, is that for anyone who is thinking about going into medicine, you know, one of the questions you repeatedly get asked at interviews, well, why medicine? What do you want to achieve through this? You know, what are you hoping to get out of this? And that's, everyone comes up with this long-winded answer, but it's something that you actually need to answer for yourself, because this is going to be a very long and arduous journey, and you're going to have a lot of challenges throughout the way. There are a lot of sacrifices that you're going to make. And the one thing that's always going to bring you back when you're at your lowest is that passion that got you into this in the first place. So if you have that defined for yourself from the get-go, I promise you're going to make it all the way through, and you're going to be phenomenal at it.
Yeah, that's really well put. And I'm trying to draw a parallel in my personal life there, where having been a consultant, I was really driven by and motivated from how do I fatten up my pockets? And then how do I cost save or revenue generate for my customer or client? And then really moving into the healthcare side of things, I began to read patient verbatims as we were standing up programs at CBS. And the impact you have, it fuels you forward if you're into that type of thing. And so I think what's foundational here is really finding what drives you and what you're passionate about, and certainly how you can make an impact. You know, and as time is progressing, we've moved into a digital world. There's this pandemic and recession, secondary looming pandemic all around us. There's shifts in the market. Healthcare transformation is real. There's saturation in certain fields, and there's you know, moves from being analysts to data scientists, and the list goes on. And what I'd really like to sort of talk about is how do you stand out in a shifting marketplace, in an ultra competitive marketplace that's fueled with all of these sort of factors? And Sarish, you sort of stick out here, someone that's in a ultra competitive field, you know, and law has sort of become saturated with there being more people in law school today than probably lawyers required. And I'm ignorant, so maybe that's wrong, but I'd love to sort of get your perspective on if folks are, you know, really interested in a career in law, how can they maintain their competitiveness?
Thank you. So, as you know, there are very few minorities in the legal field. It's specifically very male-dominated, so there's fewer women, although that is changing over time, and less diversity. And law in general is a very traditional field. We love our thick textbooks. We really are stuck in tradition that dates back, you know, back to England. We call it common law. So everything has a history, and we preserve our history. One of the ways you could differentiate yourself is figure out what you like. So for me, I didn't know I wanted to do bankruptcy law initially. So I knew I wanted to go to law school because that just fit my personality. So I went to a law school. I sat in during undergrad just to see what are the classes like, what are the law students like. I took internships, unpaid internships, to see how do lawyers, go about their day-to-day practice, what it entails. And I just took a process of elimination from there, basically learning that I'm not going to do criminal law. That was just not my personality, although I would love to help those in need in that specific field, but that was not my personality. So what worked for me was figuring out, okay, within civil law, do I like litigating, or do I like transactional work, which is basically motion practice, writing, negotiating? And I built on my skill of having an economics background. So I used my economics degree in bankruptcy. I do go to court and litigate, and you do motion practice, you do negotiation. So it builds on all of the strengths that I have. But at the same time, the way I'm the only lawyer in my family. I have a family who's full of doctors and medical professionals. So you have to be able to take risks and take chance to learn your field. And one way you can do that is go to these, organizations that are specific to your industry, sort of get to know people there, reach out to people within that industry, find someone who can be your mentor, your advocate. And, don't be scared of taking unpaid positions, and really show that you have a passion and try to learn exactly what that field is about. So show your passion. You will have weaknesses. You're not going to know everything. Acknowledge that, and just really look to find what helps you. And the people who really like you as a person, and your personality, and who see that passion will help guide you where you need to go to help progress you and develop that your career development within that particular field. And in a COVID world, networking has not only become easier because you can use social media to reach out to tons of people, but it's also become more difficult because you do have to show them, I'm reaching out to you for help, but what can you do for them? So you have to remember that, because people don't have a lot of time. And in that sense, try to differentiate yourself by trying to learn more about that person and really make it a mutual relationship so you can foster that relationship, because you're going to have a lot of people you can network with, but there's only going to be a handful of people who really advocate for you. And I think that is what's going to differentiate you, is really trying to foster those relationships you have with the people you connect with. And that's my answer.
No, I think that's perfect. And what I initially heard you speak to was your education and playing to your strengths. And a lot of folks think like, hey, I'm now in this career, and so I'm done learning, other than medical professionals who have to get CMEs and continue educating themselves. But I think it's so relevant that you have to continue and be open to learning. And then the second part of it is, as I heard it, is relationship building. And what I took away from that, and I just started thinking about some advice I give myself, is there's typically 3 types of people in your life. There's supporters, there's neutrals, and there's detractors. And the best thing I think folks can do is focus on the supporters, and maybe you can turn them into advocates. Focus on the neutrals and see if you can pivot them into supporters. And then the best you can do with the detractors is let them see what you're doing with the neutrals and the supporters. So that might be a perfect segue into networking and being now in a distributed remote world. And, when I came into healthcare, what I learned quickly and was told is 2 things: words matter and relationships are everything. So I want to open this question up to the floor. And, what advice can you give to folks that are attempting to now network in this new normal and distributed world?
I would say, first and foremost, when you're trying to network, so yes, it is a little bit harder. It's not as easy to, let's say, ask somebody, hey, you want to go for coffee, and things like that. But I still encourage people to do that, right? Like, so you can still ask them for a video chat, or if you have a safe way to do the coffee thing, in your locality. But I think before we even talk about the actual mechanics of how to go about doing it, the first thing actually comes with it is the mindset. I have a lot of friends who, when they're trying to go out there and network, they don't know if this is a formal business meeting or if this is like when they're going to a social function at the masjid party, right? They don't know, they don't actually know how to, how to think about this, right? And how to approach it. And so they end up coming on two ends of the extreme. And so the thing that I'll say is that when you're networking, have in mind already that a couple of things. First and foremost, if you're somebody who is starting out or you're at a point in your career where you're like, I don't even know what comes next, right? If you're at that point, you need to know that up front and understand then that when you're approaching your networking, you should be looking at this from the perspective of, I'm going to talk to everybody because I don't know what comes next, right? If you have a targeted vision on where you want to go, like Sylvia mentioned, early on, like this is it, and everything that she did was relating to getting to that goal. If you know where it is that you want to go and you're seeking out those individuals, when you're talking to them or before you talk to them, have in mind what questions you want to get out, right? Have in mind, hey, this person works in a clinic. This person works with media. This person works in a corporate environment. I'd really like to know, what does that day-to-day look like, right? Or I really want to know, what are the things that they hate the most about the current job, right? Everybody's got something in their job that they don't like, but have, I would say, 2 or 3 questions before you even go in that you want answered, and then structure your conversation, not necessarily as a QA session, but understand that now you have a purpose in that conversation. So, because otherwise, I've seen a lot of networking sessions or networking attempts, I should say, that have gone south really fast because the person made a really feeble attempt. They didn't know how to introduce themselves, and then the conversation just kind of fumbled somewhere, and then 10 minutes later, they really didn't get anything out of it. So that's my advice.
That is great advice. I mean, it is incredibly difficult in a world where you can't say, hey, let's go to the local coffee shop and, lattes on me. And so it seemed like you were about to chime in.
I was just going to add 2 things. So one, I think it's very important to know your audience. So I can't reiterate how many times I've been more successful at connecting with people when I have mentioned something about what they're doing, right? People love to make things about themselves as, it is today's world that we live in. And since we live in such a social world, right, there's so much that you can find out about, an organization that you're interested. What's their mission? Think about that, and then connect whatever questions you have around that, or connect, your what your goals are to that. And chances of you getting a response are probably a bit higher. The second thing I want to add to that is that you want to be persistent, right? Just because you don't get a response the first time doesn't mean that you shouldn't try again. So I don't know what the statistic is, but I do believe that you have to make more than one attempt, right, to get the outcome that you're looking for. So it's very important to keep that in mind, to be persistent and to not give up, right, if you don't hear back from someone, or so continue trying is what I'm trying to say.
That's really well put. And Sarah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, if I may add to that, I think effective networking is what we should aim for. You'll have hundreds of people that you're going to network with. You should be very effective because it is your time. Your time is valuable. So effective networking is very important. It's an art, and I think everybody needs to master it. Think of networking like a short interview. You're going to go meet this person you don't really know. You're going to ask them for career advice. You want something from them. They know it. So you want to be formal. You want to present yourself really well, but at the same time, don't be scared to show your personality, because at the end of the day, they want to be able to work with you on a daily basis, and that includes your personality. And if they like who you are and they like your qualifications and your enthusiasm to work, then they'll be more willing to recommend you for a position either where they work or with somebody else that they know who may be looking to fill a position. And so I can't emphasize that enough, because all of my opportunities came through networking. Unfortunately, I wasn't the type who, sending out hundreds of applications is stressful and it drains your spirit as you do it, and job searching is very difficult. So if you can effectively network, you can really help yourself get a leg up above the rest.
Yeah, I think it's really well put. I'll add one comment here is, and this is real tangible advice in the digital world, is don't necessarily reach out to strangers only when you need something. And there's something about being genuine and starting a conversation that helps you build repertoire and your brand. And two real life examples are, I was approached by the Chief Innovation Officer of the VA like 3 weeks ago. His message was, hey, I'd just love to talk. And we spoke about value-based care models for like 45 minutes. And then it was sayonara and maybe talk to him again. But I know that, he had a great experience on the call. I learned a lot from him, and now he's in my Rolodex and I have his number and we can chat. And just to sort of double click on that for a moment, I have a really good friend who became the CFO of a company called McKesson. And I asked him, I was like, hey, how did you get approached? How do you even apply for that C-suite job, as an example? And he said, I had coffee with someone 2 years ago in passing at an airport, and she thought of me. Mm-hmm. So really represent yourself well whenever you have a moment, and have those conversations without necessarily needing to extract something out of that person, because you can feel it when you have a sales call type of thing. And what that leads me into thinking about is mentorship. We spoke about advocates, we spoke about having people in your corner, we spoke about networking, and it all sort of ties around, how do you all go about finding and procuring and securing a mentor or a coach? And what value do you think that's brought in your life?
I can speak to that. One of the things that we're taught right from the get-go in medicine is that this is going to be a team effort. You are not going to get a leg up without good mentorship and good sponsorship. And what I will say to that is that you have to realize that a mentor is not someone who's just going to guide you and walk you through what your next step should be. It's a give and take relationship. You need to bring something to the table for them to invest their time into you, because you're approaching someone who's very accomplished in their field. And so what are you bringing to them that they should invest their time, their energy into promoting your career? So I will say this, that when you're presenting yourself, whenever you start that conversation with a mentor, do a very thorough assessment of what for example, their research focus is, or their focus within medicine is, and what their agenda is. And if it aligns with yours, then that's going to be the right mentor for you, because this person's going to go on to get you help get clinical grants, help you get jobs down the line, and really define your career for you. So if your goals match with each other and they align, that's a good mentor for you. So recognizing that from the get-go is very important. The second thing I would say is that when you approach them, bring ideas of your own. Just don't go completely blank. So if you want them to guide you in terms of the kind of clinical research that you need to design, you need to bring questions of your own, and then they're going to help develop those. So that's my little 2 cents on that.
I'll tell you that when I've had people approach me to be a mentor for them, or I don't even use that word. I almost want to say that they're kind of wanting to, develop that level of relationship so that way they can learn from you. And here's a really quick approach that some of them have used that's been incredibly effective, because like Sylvia mentioned, many people that you're approaching are already really well accomplished, probably super, super busy. They don't have time, right? And it starts with just a simple question. And I recommend this for anybody, even if you're a mid-career level professional, you're looking to transition to a different industry, you're looking at other things right now. And the simple thing is whoever you're reaching out to, and you've done your research on whatever he or she is working on or has worked on, and you'd say, hey, I noticed you were working on this, this, and this, and this is of really interest to me. I would really love to meet with you to discuss this and see in what ways I can help you. That's it. Just leave it open, right? Because he or she obviously is a subject matter expert in whatever it is that you're reaching out for. They will tell you, and sometimes it's something really simple. And I've given the response back, I'm like, I really just need a couple of these spreadsheets and this and this. And the person who jumps up and says, not a problem, I will do that for you. And he or she has just jumped in and done it for them. And that's not only a great way to network, but they built a relationship. Now they're doing work for me. Now they're gaining skills. Now they're getting intimate details of this just simply by doing that and saying, jumping in and saying yes. And so I say this because it's a way to take networking almost like on a, warp speed, right? You're really just accelerating it in a 30-second conversation.
I will say one thing to that though, because I've made that mistake before. You should, however, spell out for them that you're seeking mentorship here, because unfortunately there are going to be some people who are going to take advantage of that in terms of getting free labor. So you want to establish that boundary from the beginning that, hey, this is going to be a give and take. If I'm going to give, my background, my expertise in the area, I will need something back in return. Whether that's a letter of recommendation or a sponsorship for a job down the line.
So my experience has been slightly different in the sense that when I first started law school, I went up to attorneys that I'd met that were alums, and I would say, hey, I'm interested in what you're doing. Would you be able to talk to me? Or even went as far as to say, would you be a mentor? And that seemed to have backfired on me more than helped me. So my opportunities of finding true mentors came with people I worked with. So I took a bankruptcy class by chance at the law school, got an internship with one of the trustees for bankruptcy, went to court, observed a judge, really, really, really liked the judge. And, decided, hey, I would really love to see what the judge is doing, behind the scenes, what happened. So I walked up to the judge and I said, Judge Jones, I would love to be an extern for you. I'd love to be an intern for you. Do you have positions? Do you take law students? And he just happened to have never taken a law student as an intern at the time. So I actually came on as his first intern ever. And just developing that relationship, being forthright, and really showing, like, I'm curious about bankruptcy. I don't really know what bankruptcy is about, but I want to see more. That really helped him. And then, I sat in and I observed people in court. I took notes on what people use as strategy, what people discussed in cases. And eventually, behind closed doors, we would have a discussion. Why did they argue this way? Why did they argue that way? Why did they use this technique? And that showed that not only did it show like an interest, but it also showed that you may be wrong as a law student, as a young associate, but you're willing to have that discussion. You're not trying to prove and show them this is the right answer for even a project that they give you, but it's just sort of, tell me why. This is my perspective. Tell me what your perspective is and help me figure out what I'm missing. Having those conversations with either the people you work with or even someone you see in court. There were attorneys in court who I ended up getting as mentors because I just observed them. And just sort of, why did you advocate that way? And I really liked your litigation style. That really helped. So in the lives, I guess my experience has been a little bit more different than that. But every practice area has its own way of going about trying to find a mentor. Just show them that you are willing to discuss and figure things out, and you're not just trying to jump and get to the right answer right away. And, you're not there to, like as Azra and Sylvia said, just leech off of them, have a mutual relationship.
Yeah, there's such great advice from everyone here around procuring mentorship. And some of it is, bring something to the table. Other is set clear expectations. And there's almost this concept of having a mentor within your work environment and then having a mentor outside of your work environment. And, you know, a few examples come to mind. I'll name two and then I'll open it up to the floor on procuring mentorship outside of your work environment, because I think we've focused on that. Is within my work environment, I've been fortunate that both of my skip level managers in my current role and my previous role, so currently the chief strategy officer and previously the head of patient care delivery, were both women. And strong, successful, intelligent, like I'm in awe with their fit and finish. But I asked both of them in either through office hours that they've opened or through setting up meetings with them to say, hey, would you provide me real-time feedback and how did I do in that meeting? And I set it up really quickly after we attended a meeting together so they can sort of in real time give me feedback. And I think successful people oftentimes are gluttons for pain. They want to hear, how can I get better? What did I do wrong? Help me out. So it's not just mentorship. We're looking for coaching a lot of the time, like someone that can roll their sleeves up and tell us the things that we don't want to hear. That's in a job environment. So how about like if you put yourself in a position of being furloughed, having, you know, sort of loss of pay or being unemployed, how would you go about seeking a mentor, or you're in a transition? Like what would you do today in a COVID environment to sort that out?
I think, go ahead, Saba.
No, I was just going to say, I think given the COVID environment, one thing that's really important is, even though we are living in this environment, you know, we need to keep in mind that, you know, life is still progressing, right? Companies are still working as is with certain different dynamics to them, right? So there's also, you know, lots of societies out there, right? Like there's young professional societies, there's different societies like that you can reach out to, and where people, you know, professionals are willing to donate their time, you know, are actively seeking out people to mentor. So I think that's, you know, a very valuable thing to consider and think of. And then as well as for the younger audience that we have, you know, tuning in today, organizations, even if you volunteer for a charity, right? If you go and do some type of task for them, right? There's always learning that's involved there. You could be learning from someone. For, you know, young girls and boys out there, Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts. When I was growing up, I was a Girl Scout, right? And so that in itself made me be surrounded by women leaders, right? And so I grew up around those women leaders, watching how they're doing different things and, you know, honing in those skills at an early time. So I think it's very important for our younger audience out there to remember that, you know, you don't necessarily need to be on any career path, right? And even if you find yourself right now unemployed, there's various different things that you can do to outreach, such as, you know, volunteering for an organization, which you never know may open up a different path.
So the one thing I would say is that, this might be different depending upon, I guess, what city geography that you're in right now. But in general, I find, at least in the corporate environment, many of the folks who, when there are layoffs, tend to be between the ages of 30 and 55. And for those individuals, what they struggle with when they're trying to find themselves, you know, in that situation is they've left college. They don't have some of those networks and those friends anymore. And majority of the people that they're used to talking to are the ones that they have at work. And maybe if they were in a position where they interacted with other businesses, maybe some of those folks, and, you know, and that's about it. And so they'll find themselves in a little bit of like, so that struggle, like, okay, well, how do I get started? And Saba made a great point in terms of talking about some of the opportunities to work as a volunteer for different organizations. And I say volunteer, but that doesn't mean necessarily like packing up boxes and moving them. What I mean is that there's a lot of organizations out there today that you can help from a virtual perspective. I personally am a part of American Muslim Health Professionals. And so we work on so many different things, whether it's policy, advocacy, community, whether it is, feeding people who can't, who are food insecure, whether it's looking at building new IT platforms. And so you can work with some very reputable organizations who are out there that are doing very large projects. Regardless of the industry that you came from, you do have something to offer, whether it's in communications, IT, business analytics, filing, finance, or anything. And it's really important for a couple of reasons that if you are in a transition period, that you do take one of those opportunities. First and foremost, it adds to something to your resume. So if you do, if you're concerned about what that gap would look like, if it's 6 months, a year, 2 years for that gap, having something like that on there fills that gap, and it doesn't look like you weren't doing anything. And this is incredibly important for mid-career professionals who are out there, who are in that transition period. The second thing is that it gives you a little bit more in terms of your purpose in the day, right? So, and it helps to engage you both mentally and psychologically. I have been a hiring manager for over a decade, right? And so I've had numerous positions either under myself or under my colleagues who I've been asked to be, who I've either had to interview myself or have been a part of a panel. And I remember this one gentleman who came in for an interview about 5 years ago. He had been unemployed for almost 2 years. He had been on numerous job interviews, but unfortunately failed to receive an offer in the area that he was looking for. And the only reason, I had even looked at his resume was because another employee at our company who was on my team had recommended him. So I looked at the resume and I said, yeah, he's actually got the background that we're looking for this position, sure. And he came in for the interview, and obviously the colleague who recommended him was very well regarded. And after the interview, the person who recommended him asked me what I thought. And I said no. And the reason why I said no was because this individual, despite having the actual skill set we needed and actually having worked at organizations where he performed functions that we would be expecting for the job, failed to indicate any level of good communication skills, interpersonal skills, and actual passion for the job. And I tell this to people who are in transition that, you may not see it, but when you're in an interview, the interviewer can actually tell when your skill set has been declined. And this happens to everybody, right? If you're not out there publicly speaking, after a while, after a year or 2 years passes, you're going to be afraid to get up on that stage the first time to give a presentation, right? You might stumble a little bit, whereas you didn't in the past. And it was very apparent. And I said, this person failed to show a certain level of excitement and enthusiasm and passion. I said, at the end of the interview, I found myself asking, I said, do you even really want this job? Right? There's a difference between wanting this job and wanting a job. And so when Saba mentioned working for or volunteering, doing something like that kind of gives you a lot of things all at once. And it's incredibly important to, as you're going through the search, because it's a full-time job looking for a job, as you're going through that you're also doing something that's active for yourself as well, to make sure that your skills are always up to speed for the next job that you're going to have.
Yeah, it's really well said. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. If I might just add, COVID has put a unique spin on job searching. It's all electronic at this point. So if you have been furloughed or just let go, or your industry has been taken over by technology, I think this is the time for you to think about, did you really enjoy your job? What skill sets did you learn, or do you have that you can then transfer to another industry, another career? And then it's, regardless of whether or not you need to get a degree to pursue that career, I think this is the time where you should then do an internal evaluation of whether you want to go back to doing exactly what you did before you're in this position of looking for a new job, or do you want to then change your career path? And there's a lot of aspects of the business world that you might be able to contribute to and find a new home at that might make you happier, if you weren't happy at your prior position. So I think having the luxury of COVID, and it's not to say that being in this tough situation is a luxury, but very few of us, when we do enter the workforce, have that time to sit down and really do a self-reflection to really understand, do we really like what we're working, what we're doing as a career? So I would say use this opportunity to do that, and then figure out what your next steps are and how you can help yourself get into that field.
And I would just add really quickly, I think, Zara, you might have mentioned it earlier, but I think the transformation that's happening in some industries fueled by the pandemic is changing the landscape of those industries. So even in places that you might have not thought of previously, I think there's a lot of opportunities to kind of reflect on where that transformation is occurring. Particularly, I'm in healthcare. It's, between January of this year and January of last year, a completely different trajectory of what the industry looks like and what the innovation in the industry looks like. So I think there's a lot of opportunities that might exist in other industries that you should, definitely take a look at.
Yeah, it's really well said, Amir. I mean, I think healthcare used to have this phrase associated with it, where it was innovation at the speed of regulation. And now all of the sudden, transformation happening in industry that's fueled by technology. And it's almost like this new intersection in business that meets that strategy, that meets that technology, and meets that innovation. And so it's all about sort of curating your story. I agree with that. And just to wrap up the mentorship and coach conversation, I think the last bit of feedback I would add to all of the great advice is also being coachable. So when you reach out for mentorship and a coach, it's really, really important to be coachable and take advice and be fluid, as fluid as you can be. But, as we're talking about, and this is probably the worst transition in history, but industry is changing. Yasmin, your industry of journalism, strikes a chord that resonates fairly loudly. It used to be print is everything. Now some folks say print is dead. Others say those that don't like print or like it are mistaking the plate for the food. And the list goes on with cliches and platitudes that I could keep spewing off, but I'll stop. How do you stay competitive in the field that you're in with all of the rifts, the shifts, the innovations that have come? And how do you continue to stay relevant?
Well, I kind of want to just start off by humbling myself a little bit. In some regards, I'm very fortunate. I think some of the best journalists, especially local journalists, have been let go. I think there's a really jarring statistic that over the last 10 years, half of newspaper jobs have disappeared. And I think it's not just people who are going into journalism who should find that jarring. I think it's all of us, because just in the hierarchy of journalism, newspaper journalists are the very foundation, especially local newspaper journalists. I think they're extraordinary, and I hate that they are not being rewarded as such. I always say this to people, it's a great career. It's a tough business. It's not a business anybody has completely figured out yet. So if any MBA wants to, this is why I'm doing my MBA also on the side, because I also want to think about the journalism industry and that view as well. Anyways, to stay competitive, there's not really one thing to do. I would say if you're going to enter this industry is the reason I was so drawn to journalism in the first place is because might sound cheesy, but I love learning, and I wanted to be a lifelong learner, and I was interested in too many things. And so I was like, okay, great, like an industry that actually lets me learn about different things and like explain it to people. I think that's great. So I don't have to stay in the same beat all my life or like really focus on anything. I had a hard time focusing on one thing. And so I think maybe that's helped me personally, because I'm just, I was kind of a busy bee, like in the first part of my career. Like I worked at a big company, which was CNN. And so I just like went around different departments because I could, because it was a huge company. And so I like learned how to produce, I learned how to write, I learned how to do this, I learned how to do that. And then eventually when I came and reported for local news in Boston, I brought on like several skill sets, and I learned how to work fast, and I was able to, I just like, I was able to take on whatever challenge was given me. And one thing that I would suggest that I did not do well, and like looking back, it's like, this is where I wish, this is what I wish I had done. And I think some of the other women had echoed this. Do not lose confidence. And I think women especially are susceptible to this. I will tell you, like, at this point in my career, I have talked to Pulitzer Prize winners who still have imposter syndrome. I've spoken to people like on television who have been on television for like 30 years. And I'm shocked to hear that they still feel self-conscious about their career and whether or not they're good. And I think that was just a moment, like I'm trying to let go of that. I'm trying to use this transitional year, because I'm very much in a transitional year with this fellowship, to really think about that and how, one, that's hurt my personal career, and two, like, moving on, what does it look like when I let go of that? What it looks like is I'm not afraid to take on a new challenge. And if like, you know, God forbid, I'm like laid off one day, which, you know, like, people just have to be ready. I can absolutely take on a different challenge. And I've been learning this entire time in my career that I could just kind of hopefully jump into whatever. As long as you're a good communicator and a good storyteller, like, maybe you'll find something else. And again, just, I don't want to reiterate the mentorship conversation, but find somebody who is invested in your career. That was like, there's somebody who you ask for help, yes, but somebody who is actually invested in your career. And the way to build a repertoire with somebody is really asking for help. We are too individualistic as a society. It is absolutely 100% okay to ask for help when you really feel like you need it. Hopefully that answered the question and wasn't too long-winded.
No, I think it was perfect. You know, be fearless, be confident, be resilient, avoid imposter syndrome, and ask for help. I think this all key pieces of advice when going into a situation or an industry that's changing so rapidly. And Hadra, I'll poke at you for a second. And I think about engineering and software engineering and computer science in general. It used to be traditional RDBMS databases. It became in-memory, columnar, multi-tenant, you know, platforms. And then coding went from Java. I mean, Java's still a thing. Yeah, Java's still a thing, but then there's Python now, and there's RStudio, and, you know, people started dreaming in regression analysis all of a sudden. So how do you stay resilient and like sort of competitive in an industry that's changing so rapidly? Like, tech is just that.
Yeah. Java is still a thing, unfortunately. So we're still dealing with that. But yeah, I think the way I deal with it is I stay up to date by being a part of all the organizations that have the younger people, because the younger people are always going to be up to date on the more newer technologies and all of that. And so, and if you feel like there aren't organizations around you like that, I think go ahead and create one. I co-founded the organization at ISU for undergrad students that was exclusively online. It was entirely virtual, and it is one of the biggest organizations at the ASU campus. And it's called Code Devils, and it's all people who are related or interested to the tech field, in the tech field. And with like members like of 800 plus, they're going to keep posting about all the new technologies and all of that. And the, you know, the bigger your network or the bigger the community you create or you build, the more up to date you are going to be on those new technologies and all of that. And I think the good thing about computer science is that not much changed in when COVID came in. We have always worked remotely for a while. Like, all computer scientists get, you know, days to work remotely way before COVID was a thing. So you know, computer science was built online, and it continues to be a career that grows online. The online community for computer science is thriving. There are many courses online that you can take, whether on edX, Coursera, whatever it is, that are completely free and that address these new technologies and all of that. So yeah, my advice for keeping, you know, on on top of things is join organizations. And there are lots of like organizations that are on Slack that you can join that are free for everybody. So, I mean, a simple Google search probably will give you all of these Slack workspaces and organizations that you can join that have a thriving community, have a huge community that keep posting about all of this new technology.
That's really, you know, it's so interesting, and I'll probably age myself by saying this, but growing up, we used to have this bookshelf that had, some of you might remember this, an Encyclopedia Britannica from A to Z. And that's how you got your knowledge and wrote some reports for school. And now there's access to knowledge at your fingertips that's as easy as a Google search, right? Like I remember asking somebody, hey, what does it take to be a great Salesforce consultant? And they're like, you got to be an expert Googler. And that's probably a bad joke, but you know, it's staying on trend. I also heard that you can learn a lot from other people and join organizations in addition to primary and secondary research you might do. And that leads to probably, you know, we're short on time. It'll lead to the last question before Q&A. But Hajar, you said something that was really meaningful there, where you said there wasn't an organization, so I created one. There wasn't a organization, so I created one. Love that. And so a lot of people, I would say, are looking for careers, and there's probably opportunities to create careers. Amira, you sort of stick out there. Saba, you really stick out there as well as being entrepreneurs that built something from the ground up. And that takes courage. I think there's a lot of fear associated with, I would be afraid as well. So what advice could you give to folks that might be thinking of joining a startup, building a startup, starting a company instead of looking for a job?
Sure. So I can start with saying that you know, starting your own company is a lot of work, right? So you have to remember that you're going to be wearing multiple hats. You'll be doing the paperwork, you'll be doing, you know, the creation of whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. For me, you know, I started my company it's been 8 years now, alhamdulillah. And since then, you know, we've become an international company. Just this coming week, we're launching our program in the United Kingdom. But it didn't, you know, this didn't happen overnight, right? There's a lot of steps that needed to take place, you know, and kind of everything that we talked about today really builds into building your own company, right? You need to have the networking. You need to know what your goals are. You need to be comfortable. You need to be confident with what you're creating and with what you're trying to sell. You need to know your audience. So all these different things come together when you're trying to build your own company. I always love to say that there's no bad idea, right? So if there's something that you truly feel passionate about, and I think that's where I was in my crossroads of whether I was going to take that acceptance to medical school or whether I was going to stick with the company that I created and see where it takes me. And so if you have that, you know, inner feeling, that inner voice that, hey, this is something that I really want to do, explore it. Don't, you know, give yourself the opportunity to explore it and see where it takes you. And, you know, inshallah, that will open up even more doors for you. And, you know, today I, you know, when I look back at everything, I'm so happy, alhamdulillah, with where I am. And given that, you know, I wanted to be a doctor, you know, now I sit on teams with doctors and talk about, you know, hey, how can we make life for this patient better? So, you know, it will all come together full circle. And, you know, if you have that hunch of wanting to start your own company, definitely explore it. There's lots of great small business resources out there that'll give you kind of almost guidebooks on what you need to do to be able to get to that step to start your own company.
Yeah, and I'll echo on what you said. It's, you know, definitely a lot of work. It was, you know, risk at the time. I'm lucky I went in with 3 partners. We all had, you know, similar visions on what we wanted. You know, and I think for us, it was, you know, we just want to do good work. You know, we want to contribute in a meaningful way. And we've kind of stayed true to that through our, you know, tenure. So, you know, on that front, I think it's really important to know what you are trying to achieve and also knowing what you're good at. Like, I think that's, you know, something that's been very useful over time, and you learn to kind of hone in on what are those skills that are most, that you find valuable and that you kind of have worked on over time. Beyond that, I think just, I feel really fortunate with our company. Not only do we have, projects that we really enjoy and that are meaningful to us, we've also created a really cool culture, and I think that we've created an environment that, creates collaboration and innovation in the middle of some really stressful work. But, I think that drives kind of a lot of, who we are, and that reflects in the work that we do as well. So having that opportunity, I think, is really great. But without a doubt, it's a lot of work. It's, a lot of time that you spend dedicated to it. And I think it is very important to have, to know what you are trying to achieve, and to, I want to be cautious in using the word passion in all of this, but you do have to, enjoy the work that you're doing to ensure that dedication. So.
Yes, it's very well said, and we're just at time leading into Q&A. And I want to take a moment, first of all, to thank ISGH for giving us a platform to have this conversation. I also want to say, it's also with communicating with each other. If you think about the Muslim community, we have such immense amount of knowledge within our network, within our communities, and it's about bridging gaps and starting the conversation and not being afraid to start that conversation. I think this is what Inspire and Innovate is sort of a testament towards, is let's just start talking and helping each other out. And hopefully we take that outside of this panel and into our lives. And now leading into Q&A, there's one thing that's come up a few times, and it's probably more relevant now than ever before, which is work-life balance. And, some of the women on this panel are mothers, they're wives, and others aren't. But, in this new world of COVID, it's so difficult to separate work from life as well, and these added complexity to it. So how do you all go about balancing work and life?
I can take a stab at this a little bit. So I think one thing that I have found very valuable, especially now during, a virtual world, which I have not been used to before, although I did have a lot of remote work. I was, in client offices a lot. We were in our offices, and now everything is virtual. But taking a day away from all technology per week and trying to put aside my work and just taking a day for myself, I feel like is very, valuable. Try to do something that I really enjoy, whether that's being outdoors, going for a hike, spending time with friends in a very, socially distant way, reading a book, whatever the case may be. But I think just making sure that there are kind of boundaries in your day, and not letting it kind of creep into every single day. Because I also think, one thing I've noticed with myself, if I let myself, have access to my email at all times, there are times when you start to get burnout after that. So I think it's very important to just kind of have boundaries here and there.
I would agree with what Amira said. And what I will say, and this is my advice to everyone, whether male or female, young, mid-career, is that if you haven't done this already in your life, understand what is the most important things to you and prioritize them, and build for yourself a schedule around it, and then go ahead and set those boundaries. Because you will change jobs, you might change where you live, you might change your time zone, later on you'll have children and all sorts of other things that will, come in. And if you already kind of set those priorities early on, that actually will carry you through, and you won't feel like you had to wait for something to get out of control to start going backwards and trying to put in those boundaries. So for myself, I'll tell you early on, and I did this actually when I was in pharmacy school, because, when you're in a graduate school or you're in a tough program, that whole concept of work-life balance is still there, right? And so I had set boundaries. I was also working at the same time of going to school. So I said, these are the nights I'm going to work. End of story. These are the hours I'm dedicating to school and study. End of story. There was a party at that time, I wasn't there. There was a family event, I wasn't there. Didn't fit the schedule. If I was asked to take a different shift or asked to work on this, didn't take it. right? You have to set those rules for yourself in advance. And the reason why I say that's important is because later on, as my career got more complicated and there were additional demands, I had already had kind of a little bit of practice in doing that, right? So maybe your days shift, your hours shift on where you put in certain things. This is a Muslim panel, and so I would be remiss if I didn't mention something as simple as your 5 daily prayers, right? It's really important, to do them and to set those boundaries. And that's one thing that, that's a deal breaker, right? So I'm not going to accept a job that's going to compromise that. I'm not going to, look at certain things that are going to compromise those types of things. And so that's I say this because as a Muslim panel, that's something that we should all recognize, that we are used to setting boundaries. We do know exactly what boundaries are, particularly when it comes to something like prayers or fasting and things like that. And so trying to implement those concepts into your day-to-day life, I tell people, if you have a schedule, like for me, it's like, okay, yeah, these are the hours that I'm going to be doing this, and that's it. People make fun of me for this. I know this is like not what a lot of technology people would recommend, but I actually have 2 cell phones. I have one that's personal and I have one that's for work. And when it's my hours for not work, whether it's like a weekend or something else like that, guess what? The work phone is in a drawer at home in my desk. It's not coming with me. And that's just when you talk about work-life balance, the mental balance, the technology detox, that's why you have to set certain boundaries that also cater to even your own weaknesses that might be there. Because if that phone was there, I probably would be checking some of the emails. I probably would be responding, at 9, 10 o'clock at night on a Saturday, right? Because it's there and it's easy to do. So that's my advice there.
So Azra, I don't judge you for having 2 phones. As long as one of them is not a flip phone, we can still be friends. So what I heard here is, take a day to disconnect from tech. And the other is set boundaries. And, I've been staying with my sister for some time, and I've noticed she has 3 kids, a 4-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 12-year-old. And that's sort of a proxy for saying there's additional people in Zoom meetings for work now. And my advice for duct tape and rope is not well received. So, Sarish, I know you have children as well. And how do you balance work, your career, being a wife, and being a mother?
So I would like to start out by saying that I had my first child in my 2nd year of law school, and I had my 2nd child a month before I took the bar exam. So it was by no means easy. And I had to learn how to balance my work, studying and having children at the same time. The legal field, at least the law, is very demanding of your time, and it will always consume every moment of your life if you let it. One of the things 2 things I've learned from people around me is you have to understand what's important to you. For me, it was always family. I love my job. I love what I do. But if it wasn't for my family, I wouldn't be where I am today. So I always take out a block of my time every day during a weekday, every day during a weekend, regardless of whether I have a deadline pending, to sit down with my children, teach them how to read Qaida, have dinner with them, put them to bed. Those are important to me. And so I always take out at least 2 hours of my schedule. Whether I have to wake up at 4 a.m. and stay up till midnight to do my work, I will. But those 2 hours will be carved out for my children, for my husband, regardless of anything else. And the second thing is, there will always be, as a working woman, as a career woman, this guilt that you have that you are not dedicating enough time to your children, to your spouse. And so the best advice I ever got was, don't be afraid to hire help, right? If you have enough, if you're well enough off that you can take your kid to a daycare, or hire a nanny, or hire a house help who comes once a month even to come and clean your house, do it. Don't let the guilt take over what is important. It's quality time that is more important than quantity, right? You can spend 100 hours a week with your children. It may not be as important as spending those really, dedicated hours of time that are just so important to nourishing and helping them become who they are going to be in the future as grown adults. So those are what I've learned.
Yes, really well said. And sort of a common thread between Amira, Azra, and Sarah's your advice has been block time, set structure, and set boundaries. And I think all of that, the amalgamation of all of that nets out to organization will set you free. And being organized is incredibly important. And sort of, I just want to underscore the relevance of being organized. The next question here is for mid-career medical professionals who want to learn about technology in medicine. Where is a good place to start? Sobia, you just published an article, was it with the NIH, on AI within the gastro world? Mm-hmm. Keep me honest here. How do you, as a medical professional, stay up to date in tech?
So for me, I think the first thing I think you have to look for is, so the good thing about medicine is that we have, each specialty has really well-defined national societies. So for example, in gastroenterology, there are about 3 national/international societies which get together every year, talk about recent advances within the field. You present your clinical research, and then you have a special interest group that get together. So my interest really came from that, was being involved with the American College of Gastroenterology as a fellow, and then particularly within their AI special interest group. So you're going to have to look for those people. The other thing that's really come up over the past, I'd say past 5 years, is something called Med Twitter. So I don't have a LinkedIn account, so unfortunately, but we do a lot of our networking through Twitter now, where a lot of physicians and hospitals have set up these groups on Twitter, again, to have these ongoing conversations. So I was able to get in touch with those people a lot through Twitter and then the national societies. And then I guess to answer your question, how do you figure out what's happening in the field? One thing is going to be, you're going to have to do a little bit of research. So whether that's going on to PubMed and looking at, hey, what AI technologies are being used in medicine right now? And at least for clinical or quality assessment measures, there's not a whole lot. I've right now worked on NLP and OCR, which is natural language processing and optical character recognition, for large-scale data extraction, to see if we can streamline our quality metrics assessment. The other thing that's happening a lot is how do you use AI technologies, again, I wouldn't say replace physicians, but more supplement them. So in things like radiology, how instead of having a dedicated radiologist to review images, you have a software that's able to pick up those things and generate a report much faster than having a radiologist overnight and having to have that. So for someone who's interested in that, I think reaching out to the national societies within their special interest group, going on to Med Twitter, doing your research through PubMed would be the place to start. And then lastly, I would say being affiliated with an institution that has the resources and infrastructure to do that kind of work. So while I was at Cleveland Clinic, we were affiliated with Case Western, and a lot of our work happened through their tech or computers, or in conjunction with their tech and computer sciences students. So you really have to have the infrastructure to be able to do that kind of work.
Yeah, I think all of that is great advice, and I'll add a few things there in addition to PubMed and Med Twitter. I'll break it down into 3 categories. There's primary research you can do, secondary research, and consumer research as well. My favorite is consumer insights, if you have access to it through your organization, and really learning the pain points of the consumer and where technology might fit in as an opportunity. But if we look at primary and secondary research, I have a feed every morning coming from Gartner Forrester, McKinsey, Oliver Wyman, registered with the Wall Street Journal. All of these things help. And then really keeping a strong pulse on the VC world, because there's a lot of venture capitalist movement within medtech, within digital health, where you can go on things like CB Insights, you can go to Crunchbase, and you can keep a really strong pulse on, Humana just purchased Heal Health. Why are they getting into, care delivery, blah, blah, blah. And the list goes on. And Amira, you have to probably add to this as well, being in medicine.
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of covered it there, but I think, that's another thing to think about. There's just so many components to healthcare. And I feel like sometimes we don't realize everything that's out there. I work with health plans, trade associations, state agencies, et cetera. There's opportunities at every level for, medical professionals. So I think, definitely keeping your eyes open for that type of work, and understanding that, again, those skills are very important, throughout the industry. So.
Yeah. I hope that was enough. Hajar.
Can I interject a little? As the kid who's on the other side of Sobia's story, usually it's us, like the CS kids, who get to code everything that the med students would research and all of that. I would say connect with us. We definitely know some of the technology that I work in NLP as well. I'm the person who writes the actual code, and I know it's not that as brilliant as what Sobia do, which is she researches and writes the algorithm for people like me, and then I sit down and I write it down in code for her. So I think connecting with people, like us, who are the ones writing the code, we'll be able to show you the GitHub repositories where all the code is, and you'll be able to look at it and look at all the technology that's being used in these research papers. Reading the research paper is not going to tell you about the technology that really goes behind the scenes. It's actually looking at the actual code, which is almost always publicly accessible on GitHub.
Hey, I'm not going to lie, for my papers as well, I usually get you guys to write out the methodology. I do not do that. It does not come from me.
Yeah, but you know what? What's incredibly important is how to be. It seems like it's incredibly important to be able to, speak tech, right? Like it's almost the way I frame it is, hey, soft skills are no longer an option. Like everybody needs to develop these skill sets. In addition to some competency within technology is important, especially to liaison with the IT organizations, the digital organizations, because I can speak for large enterprises and health plans to really push product and new tech forward. It is a very cross-functional, multidisciplinary group of people that come together to create. It's not IT and tech in a silo. You have to be able to communicate well. Moving on to the next question, and Yasmin, you have a fan, is why did you choose to do your MBA? And if anyone else has pursued an advanced degree beyond the necessary, why did you choose to do so?
So thank you for that question. This is actually my second master's. I'm actually also a Georgia Tech alumni. I did human-computer interaction for my master's, but I've never taken time off of work to do school. I've always done school alongside. So I have a cheap answer and I have a better answer. My cheap answer is I was very fortunate in that I've had employers who financially supported my higher education. So if they're going to do that, I'm just going to take it. So that's my cheap answer. Technically, right now, I'm a BU employee, so a benefit is you get to take classes at Boston University. My better answer is that I am in journalism, and it's a rapidly changing field, as I've mentioned before, when it comes to both technology and process. And so the more that I can learn outside of this field, the better, I thought. It will also make me a better journalist because I like thinking the way other people think. I guess for me is, if I have the opportunity to do this, it's true, the opportunity cost for me is time. Time I could be spending with my family. But I do try to, I have learned like a limited amount of time. Like right now I'm doing my MBA. I'm just going to be very honest. Like my goal is not to get an A in every class. I make a point. I'm like, I'm going to study for this finance exam for 3 hours on a Saturday. And then, Allahu alam, like it's, I'm going to try my best, but only, I know I don't want to dedicate more time, but my MBA specifically, I wanted to think about business. I feel like we do have people thinking about the business of journalism. It's just like we don't have enough people thinking about the business of journalism. It's a very difficult business. And I'm starting, like not to say that I'm like in it to save journalism, but maybe I could contribute something that's a little bit more intelligent to the conversation. And it's kind of fun. To be completely honest, I kind of like it. And I like doing something outside of my day-to-day job. It just keeps me engaged and it keeps me excited and it keeps me like knowing other people outside of my field. And I think that's always a great thing for me specifically because I talk to people for a living. And so it's nice to talk to different people.
Yeah, that's, what I've always been in school and working as well. And I was framed as a masochist for quite some time. So I'm glad I'm not the only one. But there's a lot of cool things that sort of happen where you bring what you're learning in school to your job, and you bring what you're learning from work to your cohort at university. Is there anyone else that wants to sort of chat about higher education and why they pursued it?
So I have one thing to add.
No, go ahead, Saba.
I have one thing to add real quickly. So kind of taking like a literal mindset, right? So we go through several different levels of schooling, right? We start off with grade school, finish grade school, go to high school, finish high school, go to college, right? You get that college degree. That college degree, says that you're capable, right, at whatever field that you studied. Going one level above, getting your master's, and so I have my master's in biomedical science. At the time, I was getting it to be more competitive, right? So getting your master's or going on to any other higher level of education gives you that bit of an edge as well. It gives you that, you've continued your learning in that specific field. You have a bit more knowledge now than a person that is holding their bachelor's. So that's something always that I like to kind of think about is if you want to set yourself apart from the competition a bit more, then think about, going the higher education route.
So the one thing I'll add is I did pursue my MBA much later. I had been out of school for, a longer time period, but it was something that I had always wanted to do. The one thing I'll tell you is, and again, I'll say this as a hiring manager, right, who reviews hundreds of resumes regularly for a lot of positions. Beware of being what I called overeducated and underemployed. And the reason why I say that is because I see a lot of resumes that come in, you got a lot of initials at the end of your name, but that doesn't actually tell me that you're able to do this job. There's a huge gap between academia and what's happening in the real world. And a lot of colleges don't prepare people with the actual skills that they need on the job. They prepare them with a lot of information, a lot of knowledge. They try to hone in a lot of those critical thinking skills. They try to make opportunities available with internships, et cetera. But I can tell you that for me, I pursued the MBA because I genuinely wanted to sharpen certain skills that only an MBA would have given me. And it was something that was instrumental in my career, not because of the initials at the end of my name, but because now when I walked into a room, I was more comfortable using language that people who traditionally were in finance were using every day. Right. So I say this because if you're somebody who's considering going into, getting a master's, getting a doctorate in any area, beware that when you're out there in a job interview, you have to be able to demonstrate something that you got from that degree, and it has to show in an interview question. Otherwise, it looks like you just got this degree and you're a great student, but you may not actually have picked up anything there except for a piece of paper that has the degree.
That's very well said. We used to have this saying called, hey, that person might be a CNNE, which is like certified, not nearly experienced. So experience is tough to supplement. Anyone else? I mean, everyone here, I think, has an advanced degree, and I'll open the floor up just for a minute before going to the next question. Okay, if not, I'll add something. I think, don't get a degree just to get a degree. I think it matters that you do some diligence, because these are costly and a lot of times frivolous pieces of paper. So it's really important to gauge why you're doing it and what you want to learn from it. And sometimes it matters on institution you're going to and in the field you want to become an expert in. Because certain institutions have cachet in certain industries. So I think doing that level of research by looking at rankings, by seeking out who's teaching there and professors, and that level of diligence is important. Last question before we sign off. What is your main piece of advice for young Muslim women who aren't sure what to do career-wise? Maybe this can be like a parting shot and a one-liner from each of you.
I'll go first. I think you're never going to get to a point in your life where you're like 100% sure this is what you're doing and this is what you're going to do for the rest of your life. I'm convinced that's not going to happen. And I'm also convinced that's, maybe that's a beautiful thing. Like, it's okay. This whole like emphasis of you got to have one purpose in your life is not something I subscribe to. I think you're supposed to have a lot of purposes in your life, because like if you have one purpose in your life and you have achieved it, then why are you alive anymore? So I think your purpose in life and all of this, like it's meant to grow and change, and it's okay if it's changing every single year. And I think it's okay to give yourself time to actually explore new fields and all of that. It's never going to be too late. Like, it's never, even if you're 60, 70, you might like go for another career change. It's not going to end. That's my point of view. You're constantly going to grow. You're constantly going to change. So I would say stress less about what your purpose needs to be, and enjoy the ride a bit more, because like when you're enjoying it, you're actually trying to figure out what you want to do in life. And maybe that's that results in one single purpose, and maybe that results in multiple little purposes, and both are completely fine.
Yeah, I think a few things for me. I think, like you said, just kind of embracing the journey. Also knowing not everyone's career path is the same. So trying not to feel pressure because of that. Everyone has their own career path and finds their interest in, what they enjoy at different times in their life. And I think it's just really important to make sure you're, staying true to yourself. And I think kind of on top of that, just being authentic through the process. I think that's, really important.
I think that's great. Enjoy the process. I'll add, be kind to yourself as well. So go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's very important to be open-minded and continue learning, because anytime you learn, whether it's a new skill, whether it's a new hobby, you're obtaining, new life skills through that, and you're, overall expanding your horizon. So don't be afraid to continue learning, and always trust your instinct, right? There's always going to be 1,000 people telling you what you should or should not do, but go with what your heart, says is the right path for you.
I would just add, develop community, whatever that means to you. I don't think community necessarily means, there's a Muslim community, there's the community of like literally neighbors around you. Just like seeing other people and kind of getting inspiration from other people, I think is really important. I decided my undergrad major by running into one of my dorm room mates in a kitchen one day. And I was like, hey, what do you do? And I was like, I had no idea that was a major. Great. because it was like broadcast journalism. And so serendipity is really important, but in order for serendipity to happen, I think like you just need to really focus on relationship. I'm like just 10 years into my career, and I think relationships are absolutely the most, you can be brilliant. You can like, you know, study for, I don't know, like 72 hours a day. But like, it's just like relationships are just extremely, I think personally important to prioritize. I know there's a time for work and play, but I think just making sure like, you know, other people, just for not even because they can necessarily do something for you, but because they can inspire you in some way that you didn't expect before.
I would just say that someone who, you know, who's actually done this as well, you know, if you're if you're younger and you're going through your undergrad degree, try to take a lot of courses that are not within your major, if you can, just because you just don't know what you're gonna like, and you may not necessarily pursue the traditional path that your family or your community thinks is right for you. Do your research and don't be scared of shadowing people or doing unpaid internships. That's the best way you're going to find out if you like a field and what the field is about. And take the risk. Try to self-evaluate yourself. Is this what you like? Is this something that's going to work well with your personality? And separate passion with a career, because I love music, but I would not be a good musician by any means. So, you know, something that you can enjoy and relax after you work is important, but your career is going to be separate as well. So.
Yeah, it's very well said. I think, you know, all pieces of advice, I'll just add one that's sort of gender neutral, is just be kind to yourself. And I'll underscore what Sabas and Yasmin said about relationships. I think stakeholder management, relationship management is a waltz that we're constantly trying to perfect regardless of the tenure of our career, and to continue the waltz analogy without stepping on too many toes. You know, from an administrative perspective and from a next steps perspective, you know, we have some winners from folks that have registered here. Each of the panelists is going to mentor one of the winners, and so there'll be, you know, at least 7 people getting mentored after this. In addition to that, feel free to connect with all of us on LinkedIn to stay in touch and to build a connection. And then finally, there are some winners who are getting some gift cards, and so we'll announce that by email after the event. So again, big thank you to ISGH. If you know Selma, if you know Takir, if you know Alina from content, from programming, find them, give them a hug if it's possible. If it's not, give them a virtual hug. They really did a lot of great work in putting this together. Thank you to ISGH and each of the panelists for, you know, I know how expensive time is right now, and to take and carve out a bit over a weekend is so generous. So thank you, each of you, so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for organizing. Appreciate it. It was nice being on the panel with all of you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Take care all.
Assalamualaikum.